It's a natural phenomenon. We have nothing to do with it.
Much as I don't like calling anyone ignorant or uninformed, from a scientific perspective, that is incredibly ignorant and uninformed. What's up guys, Rosh here and welcome to All About Climate. So today's video is a little different from normal. It's my first ever reaction video. So I've never done any kind of videos like this without a script, so if it's a bit rough around the edges, you know why. The video in question was sent to me by one of you guys, so thanks for that. And it's called, Do All Climate Change Skeptics Think the Same? Now, this is a topic which I think is particularly interesting. As you know, I make a lot of videos about skeptics, debunking a lot of their talking points. And I also get a lot of comments from them, which I often engage a little bit too much with. This video, I hope, will give us some insight into how climate skeptics think, and hopefully I'll be able to comment on that. So, let's have a watch.
Greta Thunberg and anyone younger, they live in the best environment that has ever existed for human beings. There's never been a world that's more nourishing, more safe, more full of opportunity.
I'm not sure, I'll have to check this after the video, but I think that guy is Alex Epstein, who, I mean, he's a notable climate skeptic, but we'll leave that for now.
Many people, especially younger people, are being misled. I see climate change arguments and activists more as climate alarmists.
I think I'm quite educated on this subject. I can't imagine anything that would change my mind.
Well, I just wanted to be here just to possibly inform people about a more constitutional aspect of this whole argument.
I am a healthy skeptic, not just of climate change, but in general of a lot of things.
I think that people are naturally alarmists, and they make things way worse than they actually are.
I think the benefits of fossil fuel use far outweigh the side effects.
It is Alex.
Including our influence on the climate.
I distrust mainstream media. 3, 2, 1, go.
No surprises there.
Ready? You know what, to be really honest with you, you'd have to knock down the wall and put me in the street.
Yeah.
This is not far enough. I emphatically agree. I'm like, if I could go, I'd be like going through the door. The media is so corrupt and I can't get out. You guys have blocked me in, but that's how bad it is.
We laugh, but this is a really important issue because ultimately, from my experience, when we talk about any issue, not just climate change, it's really about trust. It's not really, I go on about evidence, right? And that's because I frame things in a scientific way, at least I try to. And in science, evidence is important, but at the end of the day, evidence is meaningless if you don't trust where the evidence is coming from. And really, at the heart of all climate conversations is this issue of who do you trust? And a lot of so-called skeptics simply don't trust what they're being told. So no amount of evidence that you show them is going to be effective because, well, they don't trust you. So addressing that is super important. How we do it, I don't know.
I'm well informed on this topic. 3, 2, 1, go.
I'm not ashamed to say that I'm not the most educated person. Like, I'm not ashamed about that at all, with any subject at all. And I think that's healthy to admit some uneducation, unless you're like unless you're the smartest person on the planet.
I love there's a guy changing in the background. That's brilliant. But no, this guy's point is a really valid one. And I think everyone needs to recognize the fact that most of us, all of us in fact, are ignorant probably of more things than we're not ignorant about, and myself included, right? One of the privileges of my job is that I get to speak with a lot of climate scientists, and I'm always learning something new. Every time. And what that tells me quite clearly is that, you know, what I know is just scratching the surface. You've got to remember, climate science is a huge topic. It's got everything from geology, which is kind of my own background, right through to like astrophysics, atmospheric physics, you've got glaciology, you've got all kinds of variations of chemistry and biology going on, and they're all interacting in this big ball of climate science-y stuff. So I have a very specific area of knowledge within that. And even that, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not 100% expert in the stuff I'm well informed on. Recognizing that, I think, is super important. So this guy, I really respect what he's saying, and I'm slightly amused. Oh, there's a cat. I'm slightly amused that most people, perhaps unsurprisingly, have put themselves on the side of slightly agree. And I'm very amused by this guy who's moved himself over in the background.
This just happens to be the issue I spend my entire life on, because with most issues I'd put myself like way on that side.
I happen to know something about Alex, and I may have to correct myself and do a bit more research in the background, which I'll put up on screen now with any potential information I get wrong. But Alex, he says he does a lot of research in this area. Now, he's not a climate scientist. He has significant links to the fossil fuel industry, and basically he has a strong reason to say the things he does. He's a well-known skeptic and he's a well-known purveyor of misinformation, and that's not just me trying to do a character assassination, it's a fact. But he's not wrong that he does spend a lot of his time on these issues, just not from a scientific perspective, and certainly not from an unbiased perspective.
And I think it's important. One thing, though, with expertise that comes up is if you're talking about energy policy and policies about fossil fuels like the Green New Deal, you don't just need climate experts, you need energy experts too. Because if you're talking about, oh, this is going to happen in the climate, I'm concerned about that, that's fine. But you need to know, okay, well, if I restrict fossil fuel use, what's that going to do to people?
And that's basically the lens through which he views it. It's about energy, and it's about the negatives of restricting fossil fuel use. Every element of his perspective is seen through that lens, but we'll move on.
Although I'm not a scientist, I do believe that I am informed from the perspective of constitutional, duty of government, which should be limited, and it should not be we should not be giving away our sovereignty to an international body.
And again, we can laugh, but this is a pretty important point, because you come up against it time and time again when talking about these issues. Fundamentally, for many climate skeptics, it's not a scientific issue. It's just not. And this is one of the things which I initially struggled with when I engaged with them in various forums online. It's this idea that I was coming at it from a scientific perspective. I was citing scientific literature, and I was literally showing them scientific evidence. And they were coming back at me with rebuttals, nothing to do with science, but entirely to do with government and their suspicions of politicizing things, of government overreach. And this is a genuine concern of many people, particularly people on sort of the more politically conservative side of the spectrum. And it's one of the things which I often make a point of trying to do. I really try and keep any discussion of climate change, climate science, strictly about the science. I always try and say, fair enough, I understand those concerns, but can we talk about the science? None of this changes the fact, and it is a fact, that CO2 as a greenhouse gas is rising in the atmosphere. It's rising because of human combustion of fossil fuels primarily, and that is having a warming effect on the planet at a rate at which is frankly unprecedented in the geological record. These are all verifiable facts based on hard data, scientific data. None of that is affected by whether or not the government is overreaching, right? And he may well have a legitimate concern here. It's worth hearing that. But it's important when we talk about these things to separate this issue.
You've done a lot of research on it, and so I don't think my knowledge base is as large as yours, but I still consider myself strongly informed on this issue because I've looked at the arguments, I've looked at the counter-arguments, I've listened to people on the left, on the right. Climate change is real, but it's...
Again, left, right, it's political for them. It's not scientific. Notice not a single one of these people is a climate scientist, and yet virtually all of them have put themselves on the side of being very informed about climate change.
It's not something catastrophic, it doesn't require massive government intervention, and we shouldn't worry about it.
Climate change activists are often hypocrites. 3, 2, 1, go.
I'm actually surprised that a fair few of them disagree with this statement, because I agree with it. Actually, I think a lot of climate change activists are hypocrites. Now, that doesn't make them wrong. Being a hypocrite doesn't necessarily mean that what you stand for is wrong. It just means that you don't abide by it.
Yes, while Al Gore comes and speaks to people about global warming,
Always Al Gore.
he has an entire...
Again, that guy can't make up his mind where he's going. He's changed sides.
that are running the entire time he's speaking, plus the fact he flies all over the world in his private jet.
It's a valid point. A lot of prominent politicians who are advocates for climate action do routinely fly around in private jets, have like entire convoys of their own private cars. It's a valid point.
But those who have money and they are climate change activists, I'd like to see them put some of their bank account, empty their bank accounts, put it into the whole climate change, activism.
He's got a point. And like I say, I mean, I broadly agree with this. The only thing I would say is that individual action alone isn't enough, right? We do need some level of government intervention, good policy, and we need corporations to take more responsibility.
Well, for me, I guess it depends on the activists you're talking about, just because I think that everyone's different. So they're going to be, you're talking about people with money, so yeah, maybe they're hypocritical. I think that most people are hypocritical in one way or another, and so I just feel kind of bad, I guess, saying.
I think that's a really good point. We are probably, most of us, hypocritical in some way or other. I like this guy. I don't know who he is, but he seems to have positions which I genuinely agree with, and I'd like to have a conversation with him.
Saying, yeah, you're hypocrites, you're jerks, because I'm sure I'm hypocritical in some ways. But even with that said, I think that I believe most of the activists, I think they're advocates. I think that they're genuine. I think that they believe what they're doing. And if they could get rid of every car and every plane and everything that's causing bad to the environment, they probably would, and they would probably love it.
We, as in humans, should try to stop the polar ice caps from melting. 3, 2, 1, go.
No surprises.
They melt and refreeze all the time. Sometimes more, sometimes less.
Bear in mind that this woman put herself on the side of the room which said she was very informed about climate change. And now her argument that we shouldn't stop the poles from melting is that they melt and refreeze all the time. Now, much as I don't like calling anyone ignorant or uninformed, from a scientific perspective, that is incredibly ignorant and uninformed, because they melt and they refreeze all the time is just so overly simplistic. And yes, it's true that the climate does change naturally and has changed naturally, often dramatically throughout Earth's history. And I guess that's what she's referring to. But it changes for reasons. Like, it doesn't just randomly just change. And the reasons, we know those reasons, right? So they're typically because of an energy imbalance in the climate system. So either more energy coming in or less energy coming, whatever, So in the case now, we know for a fact, we do, that current climate change is caused by an increase in greenhouse gases.
It's a natural phenomenon. We have nothing to do with it.
I mean, I don't know where to start there. I could do an entire video on why we know it's not a natural phenomenon. Climate skeptics often say, climate cycles, right? And they'll often blame the climate naturally cycles, and it does. There are natural cycles. The most common one which they allude to is kind of this cycle of glacial periods and interglacial periods. Glacial periods being kind of the more scientific name for what we tend to think of as an ice age. And it's true, we do cycle between those, and that's caused by changes in Earth's orbit. These cycles, they take tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, and change is incremental. So for example, it took 4,000 years to warm by 4 degrees since the last glacial period. That's a degree per 1,000 years, right? We've seen more than that, a degree of warming in like 100 years. That's 10 times faster. So it just doesn't look like natural climate change. Just looking at the data, it doesn't look natural. And then on top of that, we've got actual evidence that man-made emissions are causing it. So she's totally wrong.
How much of the planet is water compared to land mass?
71%.
Okay, so polar ice caps melting? I mean, I think it's quite clear that we don't need to try and stop that from happening.
I don't understand his point. Let's move on.
I mean, it's impossible.
I think absent studying the facts on this, you can't have a definite conclusion. So I disagree with the idea that we can't have an impact on it. I think theoretically you could. You need to look at what's the actual evidence of what kind of impact can we have on it, and then
It's the first time I've heard anyone use the word evidence here, which is quite telling.
very importantly, what impact will that have on human life?
If I change the phrasing to, the idea or the thought of the polar ice caps melting upsets me, where would you go?
You want me to go?
Yeah,
Sure.
We're talking hypothetical here.
this is hypothetical.
Well, for me, it's like saying if there was a volcano that's going to wipe out North America, would that upset you? Like, well, of course. And if you can change it, then do it, of course.
This, I think, is really interesting because it shows that it's not out of a lack of caring for the planet and for the consequences of climate change that a lot of these people are skeptical, right? Clearly, here we've rephrased the question. If they believed, effectively, that the consequences of climate change, which we know are probably going to happen, if they believe those consequences were going to happen, their position changes.
So yeah, something that big, something that catastrophic, I mean, that is huge, and it would change a lot in the world.
It shows they care. So, and more importantly, it shows that it's not that they are like looking at this evidence and thinking, well, you know, I don't care. It's that they're looking at this evidence and thinking, I don't believe it. And it comes back to this idea of trust, which we talked about at the beginning.
I think a lot of these climate alarmists and climate activists, they see there's like a religious thing. They practically worship the planet in some degree, or a sense of guilt about, oh, it's my fault that there's something bad that's going to happen to future generations. They give an animist element to plants and animals. That's a considerable issue, and I think that's nonsensical and part of the reason why we're skeptics. We care about human beings. We care, or we believe in a divine order. I certainly do.
On that point, climate change absolutely has negative impacts for humanity. They're talking as if climate activists only care about the planet because we care about, wishy-washy green stuff, plants, animals, jungles, oceans. We care about the polar bears. That's a sort of common trope you get. And yeah, a lot of us do. That's true. But we should care about climate change not because we want to save the polar bears, but because we won't survive. If we don't do anything, if we just continue burning fossil fuels, the planet will continue to get warmer. It'll just keep getting warmer. It's not just going to magically stop until the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere level out. That is a fact of physics. As long as greenhouse gases continue to rise in the atmosphere, the planet will continue to warm. And again, it's another fact that if it warms indefinitely, there will come a point when humanity can't survive, for whatever reason, whether it's a collapse of agriculture, or whether it just, it literally gets so hot that we can't survive on various parts of the surface. Collapse of agriculture is probably going to happen a lot sooner than that. But this idea that, us climate activists only care about animals is totally wrong. And the fact that these guys don't seem to appreciate that climate change does have serious negative consequences for humanity, if unchecked, and indeed now, I think is problematic.
Rephrase this to, if the polar bears went extinct, I would be sad.
Polar bears again. It always comes down to polar bears. I don't know why. They're like one animal.
Where would you go?
Oh, polar bear is my favorite animal. So I would go here. If it was just that, but I would say that the best chance of polar bears not going extinct is for human beings to have low-cost energy, because when we have low-cost energy, we can basically preserve anything that we want.
Low-cost energy, on that point, renewables are now often cheaper than fossil fuels, so it would seem Alex is coming out in support of renewables.
Oh, no. Yeah, well, no, I don't hate polar bears. I love polar bears.
This guy just does not care about polar bears.
But I think that we have all kinds of bears, so there'll be other bears. So if polar bears go extinct, so what?
Future generations will have a worse environment than now. 3, 2, 1, go.
If we can keep using fossil fuels, they will have a good future, because wind and solar cannot replace fossil fuels. It just can't. There isn't enough land mass for enough wind and solar farms to replace fossil.
So I'm not going to pretend to be super informed about wind and solar here, but I will definitely do a video on it at some point in the future where I'll actually look at the data. But my understanding is, wind and solar is it's rapidly increasing. Solar has got 90% cheaper in the last 10 years, and wind is also following suit. Like they're exceeding even the most optimistic expectations year on year on year. So writing them off at this stage is, I think, very short-sighted. It's a bit like writing off cars in 1910 because, horses are more efficient and cheaper and whatever, right? We are in the really early stages of solar and wind. So I don't know how anyone at this stage can totally write them off.
If we stop using them altogether.
Yeah, I mean, I say strongly disagree on the premise that if we continue to be relatively free, including free to use fossil fuels, then the world would be a much better place to live. Because the common narrative, which you certainly hear from Greta Thunberg, is basically it amounts to, if we are free to use fossil fuels, then the world is going to end and my life is so bad. Greta Thunberg and anyone younger, they live in the best environment that has ever existed for human beings. From a human perspective, there's never been a world that's more nourishing, more safe, more full of opportunity. And fossil fuels are fundamental because they've given us the power to transform the naturally deficient and dangerous environment into an unnaturally abundant and safe environment.
Let's talk about that. It's true that fossil fuels have revolutionized human society and have made it exceptionally good for us. No one denies that, and I think that that's often conflated with the idea that therefore continued use of them will have the same effects in the future. We already are seeing the negative effects of fossil fuels. I mean, for one thing, like at a very tangible level, you get oil and gas leaks all over the place. Well, that's not good. Like if you have oil spilling into ocean water, you can't just take that out. It's there. So there's a really obviously tangible problem with fossil fuels, aside from burning them causes greenhouse gases, which causes global warming. So I think we absolutely should and can acknowledge that fossil fuels have benefited humanity. But assuming that that will always be the case, in light of the fact that we know the many negative effects of continuing consumption of fossil fuels, I think that that's very naive and frankly quite simplistic.
All disasters. So every little natural disaster that happens, like fires in Australia or fires in Northern California, they blame it on global warming.
Okay, so this guy's got a point. Often the media does blame a lot of extreme weather on climate change, perhaps without good scientific reason. So whether we can tell whether a weather event's caused by climate change is actually quite complicated. It's an area of science called attribution science, and often we can't tell tangibly for months or years after an event, by which time that event is out of the media cycle. So often when the media make these claims, it's scientifically unfounded. However, the two examples he gave happen to be examples that we can directly attribute to climate change, right? They may not have been directly caused by climate change, but we can say with a degree of confidence, and I'll put up any stats on the screen now, that these fires are made worse and more likely by climate change. So he slightly undermined his own point there by using those as examples.
I think that the world is much more bigger and important than people or anything that people could do to the environment. Obviously, people have an effect on the world and the environment with what they do and their actions, but I think the world's going to last a lot longer than people ever will.
He's right about that. And it's one of the reasons why I care about climate change, is because we could very much speed up our own extinction if we don't act.
I'm willing to change my mind on this topic. 3, 2, 1, go.
Well, I said I was willing to listen to arguments. I have for probably at least 10 years. I have yet to see one that would change my mind, and I have yet to see data that would change my mind. But I will look at new data if someone shows it to me.
This is really interesting because in my engagements with various climate skeptics online, you can very quickly tell if someone is genuinely open to considering another position. And there are some people out there who just will not. This woman saying, she's open to seeing data, but she also puts herself on the side which says, I'm not open to changing my mind. That's a big red flag. That said, there are clearly some people on the other side of the room here. And I think we should always, when we have these conversations, go in assuming that they're open-minded, and also be open-minded to changing your own mind. I think that's really important. To be scientific, yes, there's a huge, huge wealth of scientific data and evidence supporting the idea that climate change is man-made, is happening, and is likely to be dangerous to humanity. Yes, there's all that evidence, but we should also still consider what we're shown back. It's only fair. It's part of being scientific.
I don't think we've been able to have an honest conversation about climate change since the 70s or the 80s, and even though I was born in mid-80s, I think we need to have an honest conversation, and I'm willing to change my mind, but it's not at the expense of any policies that will be anti-human.
Yeah, I will not change my mind. I'm pretty much set. My personal faith, I believe in the inerrancy. I believe the immutable laws of nature apply and cannot be changed.
He's right. And the laws of nature clearly suggest that if you increase the greenhouse effect, the planet will warm. But clearly he disagrees about what those laws of nature are.
Because I believe in the scriptures, the Bible.
There we go.
And basically in Genesis, as long as it says that the earth abides, as long as the earth abides, 4 seasons will not cease.
I've got no problem with religious people and religious beliefs. You're entitled to believe what you want. But religious texts are not scientific data. And people who don't understand that have a huge issue with, because you're talking past each other. My advice to anyone who wants to engage with climate skeptics is learn pretty quickly, or try and find out pretty quickly, which side of this room they're going to be standing on. If they are on the right side, then it might be worth having a conversation. If they're on the left side, probably not.
I don't think there's many things that I wouldn't be open to changing my mind to, just depending on the evidence. And
again, I like this guy. I may not agree with him on climate change, but he seems like, you know, I'd like to have a conversation with him. It's clearly he's open to changing his mind, as I am, and he's open to the fact that he's ignorant of certain things, as I am. And you know, those two states are really good to have a productive conversation. I look for people like that. So be more like Jeremy.
And seeing it, I feel like it's being on a jury of like a murder case. Like, I'm going to look at the evidence and I'm going to make the best decision I can based on the evidence. Again,
That's a really good point. We should, you know, be impartial until you look at the evidence and then weigh the evidence and then make a conclusion there. That is how to be actually scientifically skeptical. Clearly, he's arrived at a different conclusion from me. I don't know what evidence he's seen, and that's why it's important to have these conversations.
And so based on the evidence that we have right now, like, my opinion is set, but that could always change.
I think we should always be open to the facts changing, but the current facts are so decisive in favor of humanity needs more fossil fuels.
I mean, I would love to see these facts. Like, what is he defining as a fact here? Like, I mean, maybe he says, let's find out.
Going forward, to have a livable planet for 8 billion people, that if you're challenging that, you're challenging 200 years of fossil fuels improving human life and the fact that there are no viable alternatives for the next couple decades.
Again, it comes down to the fact that fossil fuels have been beneficial and therefore will be beneficial in the future, which doesn't necessarily follow, particularly given the evidence that we know fossil fuels are rapidly warming the planet and that that's likely to be bad for humanity. So anyway, and also he mentions that there's no viable alternative. I disagree with that. As I mentioned before, renewables are still in their infancy, and we shouldn't be quick to dismiss them as such. And actually the rate at which they're improving is exceptionally fast. I'm optimistic, personally.
That's a wrap, guys.
Said it anyway, guys.
Thank you. Your honesty is...
Well, that looks like that's the video. So, I don't know about you guys, I found that particularly informing. I think it's telling that no one in this room was a scientist or had a scientific background. And also the fact that so many of them thought that they were well informed about climate change. Because for me, I see climate change as a scientific issue first. And yes, it has political implications, economic implications, many of which these guys are picking up on. But none of that's relevant to whether or not, for example, greenhouse gases are warming the planet or not. That is a scientific fact. It doesn't matter if you're left, right, whatever your politics are, it doesn't change physics. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. So yeah, if you like this kind of content, do let me know, because this is totally new for me, and I apologize if it's a little bit, as I say, rough around the edges. I've never done unscripted content before. But if you want more of this, absolutely let me know. If you've got any video suggestions for me to react to, let me know. I'll be more than happy to try them out. And of course, if you want to see the channel grow and you like this content, like it, subscribe, comment, all of that jazz. I really appreciate it. So thanks for watching, and until next time, goodbye. That's Ziggy. It's not my cat.